Welcome, everyone, to Zoom into Books this afternoon. We have an exciting time. We have a workshop with multi-award-winning, international award-winning author Don Helin. Don is a thriller writer. He's written several wonderful thrillers based on his Army career. He retired from the Pentagon. And he's also written travel books and nonfiction, and he has written a memoir himself. And this is part of a memoir series Don has been doing for Zoom into Books. And we welcome you today, everybody on Facebook. If you have questions for the author, please type them in the comments on Facebook. And we'll make sure that Don answers all your questions at the end of the workshop. So Don, I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay, thanks a lot, Kathy. Well, it's great to be here again. As always, I enjoy these workshops. And the first one I did was I had a bunch of charts, and I thought for an overview that worked. But now we've been kind of breaking out the various pieces of writing memoirs. And so what I'm hoping to do is to talk to people individually just about the different memoir techniques. And today we want to talk about structure, which is an incredibly important part of memoir. And at the same time, we want to talk a little bit about setting, because in other words, you want to make sure that you have a setting so your readers can kind of feel. You don't want them out floating by themselves. You want them in your memoir and feeling what you feel. So let me just go back for a minute and give you a little summary of kind of where I've been and how I got here. You know, Elaine and I moved to Willow Valley. My goodness, it's been about 5.5 years. And at that time, I'd written a number of novels. And to be honest, I really didn't know much at all about memoirs. I'd had a 30-year career in the military. I went to a variety of different places. I spent, gosh, almost 10 years, 3 tours in the Pentagon. I was overseas in Vietnam and Germany, and assigned to a variety of different posts here in the United States. So when I got here, I wasn't thinking about memoirs, but then I started meeting friends. And one of my friends had been, I guess he was about 20, and he was lived in East Germany, and he just was so frustrated, he couldn't take it anymore. So he and his buddy went down into the basement for almost, 20, 30 times over a number of months, and put a kayak together in the dark, and then took it apart, put it together, took it apart. And then one night, they went out on the ocean, put the kayak together, pushed off, and managed to duck some of the patrol ships that were patrolling the coast, and they were picked up by a Danish liner. That liner dropped them off in West Germany, and it took a few days for people to recognize that these were just a couple of guys who were trying to get away, and they weren't spies or anything like that. So he lived in West Germany for a couple of years and then moved to the United States. Another friend who, when he retired, started his own baseball team, bought a team, and then somebody else had marched with Martin Luther King in Selma. I mean, these are some of the memoirs that I found. But you know, they don't have to be super spectacular. There was one I always remember. This woman came into our memoir class in a wheelchair. And I said, what are you interested in? She said, you know, I want to write a memoir so that my grandchildren know what I was like before I was stuck in this wheelchair. And that just made me feel good to help her be able to do something like that. And we have a number of people that have written interesting stories about how they met the love of their life. And many of them were almost near misses. It didn't necessarily happen, but over time, it all worked out. So there were all kinds of memoirs that just seemed to catch my attention. While we're talking about it, it made me think, what is a memoir? Well, a memoir really, it's not an autobiography. Let's say an autobiography is a whole series of your life. But a memoir, rather than that whole series, is just it's a slice of life on your whole autobiography, your whole story. It's something that you want to share with people. And it's a specific thing that's kind of interesting. And so now how do you decide how to do that? How do you pick what you want to do? And I always encourage people to start researching a little bit, look around and say, what is it that you're trying to do, that you want to do? And, a memoir is kind of like a time travel. You're taking your readers back into another time and helping them understand what that was like and why you chose that. And oftentimes you can find in your research these little nuggets of things that really make your writing pop for people. But be careful, because research can lead you down a path. You can end up spending all your time. It can be fun. Keep doing research and you never write your memoir. So don't get caught in that rabbit hole. Now, the thing that I found when I was writing my suspense novels is, where do you start? Well, you start your novel with an inciting incident. All of my novels, I have a hero, Colonel Zach Kelly, and Zach works for the President's National Security Advisor. And he and a small team help the security advisor try to deal with unusual circumstances. So I always start my novel with what I call an inciting incident. And that may be a bomb that goes off. It may be an assassination. It may be a kidnapping. If you go through and look through my various books, you'll see that there's just a lot of different things that you can start your novel with, but it should be something. The key is the inciting incident should be something that pulls in your reader. Now, in a memoir, it's a little bit different. You don't have that inciting incident. You don't have that bomb going off necessarily, or somebody being kidnapped. It's what we call a tipping point. And the tipping point is something that's significant for the character, for you, something that happened that kind of turned your life upside down, turned it around, something that will fully engage the reader as you tell their story. For example, it might be an illness. It might be a marriage, a divorce, a new job, a move. Success might redeem you if you've had a lot of problems. So a memoir can be a start of something, and it doesn't have to be a long time. I have a good friend. We run a writers group together, and he was a captain in the Maryland State Police. And for many of you who remember the awful story of the Beltway Bandit, that goes back several years, but the Beltway Bandits started out and they were shooting people in gas stations. And my friend was the head of that police force and chased these guys down. And his memoir was 22 days. The tipping point of his memoir is when the first shooting, and he got involved. And then that led, and for any of you that may remember, They finally captured the Beltway bandit on an interstate, pulled off on a parking place. And his memoir was those 22 days. So your memoir can be a lot of different things, and don't feel it's got to be long and involved and all that sort of stuff. It can be a short, whatever you think your reader. Often people like to write for their families, and maybe it's something that how you and your spouse met, or something that happened to you, or a business you started, or whatever. I've written right now 3 memoirs. The first one I call From Army Regulation to Novels, A Writer's Journey. And this is a memoir that started me out after I had retired from the Army. And then how I got into writing novels. A second memoir, and I've got some of my friends who are writing in this, it's called Voices from the Pandemic. And my publisher suggested we start this. So I taught how to write a memoir, taught several classes. And then the tipping point, of course, was the pandemic. And we had like 32 or 34 different memoirs from different people that were terrific. And it really helped. I think a lot of people don't realize that for younger people who did not go through the pandemic, I can remember the first couple of weeks that Elaine and I were here. I found myself really concerned, almost scared about going to the grocery store. Can you imagine that, being scared about going to Giant? People don't understand that, but that's exactly what happened. And the third one I've written is a shorter one. Many of you have had dogs. And so I wrote what I call a family of dogs. If you've had a dog and you know how lovable they are, when our dog died last fall, it really set me back. And I went out and I told some of my friends, geez, our dog died. And they immediately said, well, God, I had this wonderful lab and he died or she died. And I began to think, well, now, what is it about dogs that endear them so much to you? And I began to realize, so I captured some of the other stories. And I think it won't come as a big surprise to people, but it's really that unconditional love that they provide for you. Now let's go back for a moment to fiction. Fiction is made up. I do it all the time. I work hard to come up with a fictional story that people will enjoy and get a kick out of. But a memoir is totally different for the writer. A memoir is nonfiction. But, and let me repeat this, it's not different for the reader. A memoir is not any different from a reader than a novel, because you know what? They want a good story. They don't want to be bored to death about something that you've done or whatever. And so what we're trying to do is take that nonfiction and make it fun and interesting. And the way we do that is to use some of the tools of fiction that really help us bring that story alive. And let me go back a little bit to when I left the Army. I'll have to admit that I didn't feel there'd be a big demand in the civilian community for a guy who's pretty good at writing subject to letters and pretty good at writing Army regulations. And I thought, now what? And I found the paper was a ad for a travel writing symposium that was hosted by the Washington Post. And I attended that over an 8-week period, and it just was so enlightening for me, And what they taught you is what I tell people, and some people understand, some don't, is creative nonfiction. It's using a variety of techniques to bring your nonfiction alive. And why is this so important in travel writing? What I was trying to do, if I was writing about a place, my job was to write so that people would want to go out there, would want to come and visit that place. That's exactly what a travel article is about. Now, you have travel articles where you're trying to bring people in to someplace, and then you have the stories where this is just the brochures of, hey, the times that things are open and all that sort of stuff. So that you've got travel writing, travel articles, and travel brochures. Brochures are the nonfiction, and they've got to be accurate. You want them to be accurate. The travel articles still have to be accurate, but they had to be written so people want to go there and visit. And that's the whole secret of travel writing. And so once I retired from the Army, Elaine and I moved to Perry County and west of Harrisburg. And to tell you a little bit about our county, up until about 10 years before we got there, they didn't have a stoplight in the whole county. So it tells you a little bit about the nature of our county. And I spent, I guess about 6 or 7 years as a travel writer. And that was a terrific learning time for me, because I was using and applying the tools of creative nonfiction to articles. So getting people to come and enjoy the places that I enjoy. Then after about 6 years, I thought, it might be fun to try to write some novels. And so I've always loved to read suspense thrillers. And so I said, well, maybe I ought to start trying writing suspense novels. So I began to take what I learned in travel writing and put that into novels. And I was really lucky, because here in Pennsylvania, we have the Penn Writers, which is the statewide writers group. And this is a combination, oh my goodness, there must be 500-600 writers throughout the state. And every year we would have meetings and conferences, and bless them, those senior guys who've been at it for a while were very good about sharing their knowledge and the information and helping the folks who were new learn how to write. Then, since I was writing suspense thrillers, I joined International Thriller Writers. Now, International Thriller Writers is as it says, is got hundreds of thriller writers in it, and they have what's called a debut author program. And that's where new people into the program can join, and it's an online program where they can join. And there was, I guess, about 16 of us. It's almost like a pledge class. And every month we would have people get together and we could ask questions. And my mentor was so helpful, Lee Childs. I always remember all the things that he did for me. Excuse me. And so it really worked out well. So over the next 7 or 8 years, ITW and excuse me, let me get rid of that. ITW and Penn Writers helped me improve my skills. What I like to do now is break out this creative nonfiction. There is structure, organization, character, dialogue, and setting. And let's talk about structure and setting for a few minutes. Now, structure is really important. What that does is provide organization to your idea. That's the simple way of putting it. And there are two types of structure. One is what I call chronological. And this is where one thing happens and another thing happens, and that causes something else to happen. And that's one way that you can put your story together. The other way you can put it together is episodic or episodes. And a lot of my friends do that, and I do too. An episode is a small story and then another story, and you kind of stitch those together into a bigger story. And that's kind of how you put your memoir together. So let's look at a memoir. You know, I mentioned that my first memoir that I wrote was From Army Regulations to Novels, A Writer's Journey. And what I did is I tried to make this like a novel. Like a novel, there's at the beginning, there's normal times. Things are going well. I just completed a battalion command. I was assigned to the Army War College. Things were looking good. I was blessed to meet my wife, Helin. I was able to talk her to leave the hills of Perry County and come with me to Washington. So things were really going along well. And all of a sudden, the tipping point arrived. And let me just read chapter 1 and show you how perhaps to put together a tipping point. National Cancer Institute, June 23rd, 1983. The June heat and humidity in Washington, D.C. felt oppressive as Elaine and I walked across the parking lot at the National Cancer Institute and into the side door to reach the elevators. I didn't say it was a hot day. I tried to put the reader inside my head so they can see what I saw, what they can feel, what I felt. And that's something we're going to be teaching next week. The National Cancer Institute was part of the National Institute of Health and located in Bethesda, Maryland, on a campus-like environment of 65 buildings. Definitely a challenge to find your way around. So we're starting out to give a little setting so people understand what I'm thinking and people understand the setting. The doctors at Walter Reed had referred me to NCI for a consultation. It had been a huge surprise and a punch in the gut. And the doctor said that I had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. All of a sudden, I didn't have any idea that that had happened. My wife and I got off the elevator. My heart was beating fast. And we walked along the tile hallway to the oncology office, our heels clicking on the tiles. So you can kind of feel me walking. It was like I could be walking toward an assassination. I pushed open the door and I looked around. And then I walked up to a desk where a dark-haired woman was sitting. Now is what's so important is to bring dialogue into your novels. Good morning. Good afternoon. My name is Don Helin. I have an appointment with Dr. Averbach for 1 o'clock. She ran her fingers down and checked the book. Yes, Colonel, here you are. Please take a seat. The doctor will be with you shortly. I wanted to tell her I didn't have a lot of time to waste. I'd been waiting for a week for results of that biopsy. But then I realized that wasn't her fault. So I began to think about having arrived in Washington, and all of a sudden, a short nurse with red hair came over and kind of shook me out of my reverie. Colonel Helin, please come with me. Elaine and I followed her into an office with a desk and exam table setting, some routine medical equipment, and a couple of chairs. So you kind of know where we are, not only how I'm feeling, but where we are. Please take a seat. And she handed me a white gown. I hung up my clothes and slipped on the gown and hopped under the table. Elaine gave me a thumbs up. It's going to be okay. Averbach knocked. When I called yes, he came in. He looked down at my leg. As I understand it, Colonel, the place they took the biopsy was on your right upper thigh. I showed him my thigh, and he said, yes, it looks good, no infection. He straightened and walked over the desk and took a seat. I couldn't wait for him to bumble along. What did the biopsy show, doctor? He opened my file and glanced down for a minute. Then he looked directly at me. We biopsied 2 lymph nodes in your leg and 1 under your arm. I'm sorry to say they all showed positive for lymphoma. I wanted to put my head in my hands. I couldn't believe it. Are you absolutely sure? The doctor stared at me for a minute and then nodded. I had trouble talking, so Elaine asked, what does this mean? It's not a good sign. It means the cancer has spread throughout the lymph system. Unfortunately, this places the colonel in stage 4. Doctor, I said, trying to contain my voice, tell me what stage 4 means. Averbach took a deep breath. Because the cancer has spread, it will be harder for us to stop it. Elaine swallowed hard. Is there a threat to life? The doctor nodded again. What? I almost cried out. Tell me exactly what this means. Do I have to get my affairs in order? The doctor took a deep breath. Okay. It means that on average, patients in stage 4 have a lifespan of approximately, he paused, I waited, 6.5 years. Elaine and I looked at each other. Neither of us able to speak. I was only 42. He was telling me I might not make it to 50. The doctor raised his hand to catch our attention. Here at the Institute, we're beginning a study protocol for patients with your diagnosis who served in Vietnam and have been exposed to Agent Orange. That fits me, I said. If you agree, we will randomize you into one of 2 pieces. Elaine and I looked at each other again, neither of us sure what to say. The doctor leaned forward, holding my file. I know this must be an awful shock. I suggest you go home and think about it. He stood, and Colonel Helin, I'm sorry the news couldn't be better. I want you to know we'll do everything we can to help you. He stepped out. I got dressed quickly. Pushing the clinical door open, I rushed out in the hallway. I was afraid I might be sick. My mind was reeling from what I had just heard. I felt good. How could this be? How would I tell our children? Okay, that's chapter 1. So now people know the tipping point in my memoir. And as a result, it's probably enough to keep them reading for a little bit longer anyway. So now we get into the structure that you want to use. How are you going to use your tipping point? How are you going to use that to move forward? I decided to use it as a road not traveled. For example, my first episode was I graduated from college and I was assigned to Fort Carson. And I tried to make each one of those interesting, For example, at Fort Carson, we were on orders to go to Cuba because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that was a frantic time. Then the road not traveled, after a year and a half at Fort Carson, I would have been able to get out of the service. But then, of course, the Army came forward and said, we'd like to send you to Europe. But if you're going to go to Europe, you're going to have to extend for another couple of years. And we thought about it and decided, sure, that was something that we would do. So all of a sudden, I had 4.5, almost 5 years to serve, rather than just the first initial 3. But that was all right. I figured, well, we'll go to Europe and enjoy it. But then when, and that was when President Kennedy was shot, that was an exciting time. We were able to go into a communist area in the capital of Germany, and we saw a lot of different things. So it was an interesting time. When I came back, I could have gotten out on the road not traveled, but the Army offered to send me to graduate school. And I went to the University of Iowa, almost by Kent State. So we were there, and here I was, an Army officer, when those students were shot. And what a time that was, trying to explain. And it didn't work out very well. It was a very, very difficult time. Then, of course, the next chapter was I was going to Vietnam and what happened to me in Vietnam. So I tried, after I had captured people on my tipping point, then show them the different pieces of the structure that I wanted to use. And of course, I had the time in the Pentagon. I could talk about that. And but I think as you're going along in your study, in your structure, you need to think about every story has a context. A story is a world unto itself. You know, it's a world that lives and breathes and grows on your character. So you want to bring that world alive for your readers, because the readers want to move into that world with you. They want to escape from their own stresses, and you have to figure out how to help them. And we do it in novels all the time. And that's what makes a lot of people like to read novels. Well, maybe you could do it in your memoir if you use some of the same techniques that we talk about. And like setting, for example, it's more. Setting is more than just a bunch of rooms and landscape. It's a human outlook, a historical. The essence, what you're trying to do is bring people into the setting so they know how you felt about it. It might be a dark house and they say, oh God, this place gives me the creeps. That's what you're trying to do. And the key is not how that place looks, but how it makes you your reader feel. And that's what you want to set up, is a place that they're happy in or sad or upset. Now watch for the overuse of kitchens and living rooms. Try to look more into airports or life rafts or recovery rooms, unusual places where people are kind of interested. It's a little different. Airports are always a good one. Particularly, let's suppose you walk into the airport, it's almost empty. And you look around and say, why is this place so empty? It brings something with as you go. And it sets the atmosphere around your story. And that's exactly what you want to do. So a really great novelist not only sets the scene, but he unveils a unique place which resonates with a sense of time. So when you're describing setting, you're building that world. You set your characters free in that world. And is that easy to do? No, it's not, but it takes a lot of experience, and it helps you to bring your story alive. And that's what's going to help your readers understand what's going on. Now, I had mentioned that my publisher and I did an anthology, and we did a number of memoirs, and it was an anthology that was based on the pandemic. So a tipping point, of course, was the pandemic itself. And so my publisher asked people to give a 15-word memoir about how the pandemic impacted them. So each of the stories is a little bit different depending on what they did. For example, Joe Coleman, many of you know, he was a lead singer for the Platters for a long time, 20-some years. And all of a sudden, he had no place to sing. And his anthology is When the Music Stops. Another is Drama Denver. Drama is the husband of Bob Denver, the Gilligan's Island fame. And she has put together a wonderful foundation for her family. And all of a sudden, trying to keep this going was a problem. I think the most sobering one was called Tidal Wave. And this was put together by Marie McGowan, who ended up trying to be a traffic director in a lot of these wards. And the awful things she had to go through. And every night after working 18 to 20 hours, she'd go home and she'd have to take a shower and wash her clothes. Everybody was scared, worried about whether or not they might get something. So it was really a tough time. Rob Fury led an expedition with a bunch of his students, and he started out right before the pandemic hit. My friend, Joyce Nisley, who's here, also wrote a memoir on a blind date. It can be a lot of interesting stories. And we had a group of 6th graders who were here to tell their story about how it impacted them. And it won a number of awards. And so what we want to do is to use these techniques of creative nonfiction to bring stories alive. And we've talked about doing research. We talked about structure. We've talked about setting. And the last 2 that we have are character and point of view. And these are, I've left these to the end because I think they're very hard to do. Your character has got to be somebody that your reader associates with. And a point of view is trying to bring people into your story so they understand how you're feeling, how everything is going, and what you're trying to accomplish. So we'll be on our next one, we'll be talking about character and point of view. And the last thing I'd like to end with is, many of you may be thinking about, gosh, there's no pandemic anymore, but there's something that I'm following, and maybe you are too. And this might be something that you might think about writing a memoir, and that's artificial intelligence. I can't tell you the number of articles I've cut out. And the summary, let me just read the summary here. News coverage of artificial intelligence abounds. The availability of AI tools is raising legal and ethical questions in workplace, in schools, in holidays, Hollywood, and in the arts. Some economists predict artificial intelligence technique like Chat GPT could replace hundreds or millions of jobs in an reorganization of the workforce, mirroring the Industrial Revolution. And there are concerns that AI-generated disinformation could make elections even more difficult. So this is something I just mention this because I think, we're looking, here's a ready-made tipping point that you might want to consider in thinking about. But and again, I'm sorry, I lost my voice there for a minute, but it came back. And fortunately, I think we were able to do the job. So Kathy, do we have any questions?
Hi, Don. That was very good. And you're exactly right. Artificial intelligence is fertile ground for fiction, nonfiction, short stories. And we did have a couple questions about, are you working on a new book now?
Well, I am. And I'm working on one that I hope will be out later this fall. I got really interested. I read the Fingerprints of the Gods, which is just a wonderful one on forgotten generations. And then I was doing some research and I got into the terrible mess that our country did in Afghanistan with the crazy way they tried to stop all the farm, because about 80% of the drugs come out of Afghanistan from the poppies there. And so we set up a program to kill all the poppies. And of course, the farmers, that's where they made all their money, and that failed miserably. So I thought, now how could I bring those two together? And we're talking about from Afghanistan to forgotten generations, and see what people think about that. So that's one that I've been working on, and I hope will be out this fall.
That's great. We're looking forward to that. And Don will be a featured author in Charlotte, North Carolina with us at Southern Christmas Show. And one other thing I'd like to mention to people is that there is a new competition that was recently put together for short story writers.
Oh boy.
And I have posted that information. It's the Next Generation Short Story Awards in conjunction with the Next Generation Indie Book Awards. So we're all very excited about that. And I've posted the links in the comments on Facebook. And Don's going to be one of our judges this year. So
I think that's going to be a tremendous, because there's a lot of people that aren't sure they want to tackle a novel, but some of them are very good writers. So I will be interested to see what we get in that program. So
absolutely,
I think that's overdue, and I'm glad to see that that they're giving that honor, the honor that it deserves.
I think so too. And Don would like to have you come back in the future and do maybe a short workshop on writing a short story.
Oh, I'd really enjoy that, because a lot of this stuff that I learned from travel writing is how to get people into the short story, and it took me a while, because it's hard to flip from a novel to a short story, because you get thinking about, and you can't have as many characters, but it can be wonderful. And I've read some terrific short stories, and they're great.
And the length on these stories are 5,000 words or under.
Okay,
great. So it's a good length for getting a story told. But Don, thank you so much for coming back to Zoom into Books. We love this memoir workshop series.
Okay,
and
thank you, Kathy.
If you all have questions for Don, I've posted the links to his website. and check our event schedule. Posted that link too. And we will look forward to having you back in the very near future, Don.
Great. Thanks again, Kathy. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.